Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.com.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources, all backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio. G'day, mate. It's a better start than last time.
Last time we were a little bit rusty, so I think that, it's like riding a bike. You do get back on, but yeah. Maybe playing golf's a better analogy.
True.
Yep.
You play golf?
I did before I had kids, and that's a long time ago now. So I might sneak in around a year, but no. And Jane's told me as well that I said, maybe I'll, as I start to slow down with work one day, I might take up a bit more golf. And she said, no, you're not allowed to. You'll spend far too much time down at the golf club and not doing things I want you to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a lot of time away from family and home. And that's why I've always wrestled with that. I played a lot of golf when I was a teenager. I played basically every weekend between I was 14 and 18, and probably once a year now I'll get out and just have a bash around with mates. But I've actually started playing a bit more regularly the indoor virtual golf where you just bash a ball against a virtual a wall with that tracks the ball and all that kind of stuff. And I catch up occasionally with a mate once the kids are in bed. His kids are in bed, my kids are in bed, 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 at night, indoors, air conditioned, hit a ball against the wall, get your swing in, get your back moving, feel like you've done something, feel like you've hit a ball. An hour and a half later, you feel like you've actually had a hit a golf and a chat with a mate, and then you go home and go to bed. All about it. That's a new favourite of mine.
Well, I have to say that when you hit it straight and hard down the middle of the fairway, it's an addictive feeling. Like it's like you just need to do one of those around and it'll get you back next time.
Yeah. So that's it. Well, funny. So last episode we talked about VO2 max scores. This week we talk about heart rate variability. But I remember a few years ago there was like this paper. It kind of looked at it. I think it was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. They talked about all-cause mortality, and they looked at some of the activities and sporting activities that extended people's lives and improved their quality of life. And golf was up there. Golf was up there with tennis and squash and badminton as activities and sports that basically put more life into your years and extended your life. Yeah, everyone's going to die, right? But it's, your all-cause mortality risk is reduced. And I think it was up around the figure of about 30%. And it kind of made sense to me at the time. It's like, well, if you're going out for a couple of hits of golf every week and you're walking the course, you're not driving it, there's you're playing 18, there's, a good probably 2 to 3 hours of walking and 10,000 plus steps that you're getting in every day, plus the social elements of golf and all that kind of stuff. So, I've always used that as a good counter argument to, any resistance to playing more golf. It's hey, I'm going to be around for a little bit.
You want me around for a while, don't you? I've also heard about that study, and also the theories of why that those sports particularly kind of can extend lifespan. And I think it's a really good theory. Is that not only is it the steps, not only is it the being outside, it's social. You got to think. There's balance involved. Like you think about, the oldies who are 70 or 80 and, don't want to fall, etc. Like it makes a lot of sense to me. So, yeah, maybe
bit of vitamin D too in good doses. Anyway, also too, just a bit of a public service announcement. This that I'm holding my hand for anyone that's watching the YouTube. This isn't a Guinness. It's about lunchtime here in Australia. This isn't a Guinness. It's my new favourite drink. It's a long black. I pour an espresso shot. I get a big ice cube, put a bit of water in it, get the steaming wand, and I froth the crap out of it. And it gives me this beautiful, super long black with a frothy top. So if you're asking, I'm still off the booze. It's 4.5 years in. This is a long black, frothy long black. So don't at me.
I believe you, Mick. I believe
Yeah.
you.
Well, the way I introduced last week, anyone would have thought I've fallen off the wagon, but no, I'm still holding the course. No alcohol in 4.5 years, so feeling good
Well
about
done.
that.
Well, we're talking about heart rate
Yeah.
variability today, aren't we? Great, because like it is last week we spoke about VO2 max and how much you measured it, which wasn't all that often.
Not much.
But I do. I when it comes to
What's
heart
yours,
rate
by the way? I
variability.
didn't even ask you last week. What are you sort of? With
My
all your
gar-
swimming, you'd be up there, up around the 50s.
Yeah. No. I think I'm 46.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. So it's if I drop 3 or 4 kilos, it'll be a lot better. So because you remember it is per kilo. So
Yeah.
that's the best. That's the fastest way I'll get to 50. It's not by training harder. That's
it goes hand in hand, right? Yeah.
It does. And this is the heart rate variability is actually a metric I look at all the time. And the interesting thing is because I look at it often, and because it on the Garmin and with the Garmin app, it comes up as body stress. So I look at it not only for how I recover from sporting activity, but also, we've got busy jobs and busy family lives and whatever. And the interesting thing is like how much my heart rate variability can increase or decrease depending on work stress and meetings and long days and all that kind of stuff as well. So I know that we're going to talk about it in context to sport and performance and recovery, but I also think there's a really good conversation here to have about life and looking at that data as well. Yeah.
Because it does, absolutely. Your daily stresses, your physical stresses, any kind of simmering underlying illness, alcohol, drugs, any other drugs, both, pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical, it all affects our heart rate variability, which is what we're talking about today, HRV or heart rate variability. You just talked about yours. It comes in relation to exercise. Up on my phone, I've got a Samsung Health kind of system. I only get sleep HRV and what happens during my HRV at sleep. Is that what you get too, or do you get it in terms of your exercise as well?
My Garmin doesn't take it whilst I'm exercising it, so but it takes it for the rest of the day. So I'm almost the opposite of everyone else, because a lot of people will measure their HRV either first thing in the morning or what's happening overnight. Yep. Mine's running all day. So I just look at it on the body stress monitor, and I can kind of see what's happening there. Generally, and I know that you're going to talk about this, but I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. But I know that you can look at one day and go, holy heck, that's not great. But you got to look at the long-term averages to see really where you sit. And my long-term average is pretty good. Like I tend to. It looks like I live my life in a fairly reasonable parasympathetic state. So I'm happy about that because, but there are definitely moments where I'm not. So,
yeah. So basically to set the scene, what we'll talk, HRV we're going to talk about today. I'll first tick off, what it is, how I guess the numbers sort of fluctuate up and down and what's driving that. Try to find out a little bit about what potentially is a good HRV number and what potential ranges are. And then have a look at how HRV is affected over the immediate 48 hours of exercise and how that may affect your results. But then also take a look at the elite world, what's happening in the elite endurance world with HRV numbers, and then sort of peel it back to everyday people and what it can mean for us everyday people. Looking at females next, really interesting live systematic review there where it's just a constant evolving data crunch there over many, many years. And then we'll wrap it up looking at teenagers. So trying to sort of get the whole breadth of the population as much as we can with this one. It's certainly, to be honest, like a very foreign topic for me, other than sort of opening up the phone and seeing my sleep HRV every morning and all that kind of stuff. It's not something I probably have spent much time attending to, but I found the deep dive on this pretty interesting. What I found, my original assumption was a high number was probably a bad score. I don't know what my original gut instinct was and why it was sort of taking me there. But when I looked at it, I thought HRV, it's probably not a good thing to have. And when we think about blood pressures, we think about heart rates. We sort of associate high numbers with bad health measures. And HRV, it's the opposite. To have high numbers with your HRV, it's actually a good sign of health, and a good amount of variability between each heartbeat is actually a sign that your parasympathetic system is kind of in a calm and relaxed state. I found that fascinating. And because the HRV is driven by our sympathetic system, so our fight or flight response, and our parasympathetic system. So when things are calm and you're really well regulated, or you're in recovery mode, you want to have, a high HRV number. You want it just sort of cruising along. Now, the reverse is seen. So, a lower HRV is functioning a little bit more like a metronome. So we don't necessarily want to see a really small number and very low variability between each heartbeat. It means our sympathetic system, so our fight or flight response, is really ramped up and kicking along. And that's a sign more often than not in terms of stress. Now, it could be stress through work or through life, or it could even, obviously stress with exercise. And exercise is stressful, especially if you're in the high intensity training zones. When you're lifting weights with high intensity, you're doing sprint sessions, or you're doing some VO2 max sessions, or some, high intensity interval sessions. Like, that's very stressful in the body. So your body's going to go off into a fight or flight response. And so that's where we end up sort of seeing a much different number. So that's a kind of a bird's eye view of what HRV is, what is basically driving it, what's high in face value. High is usually seen as good, low is seen as not so good, but there's always context, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
I thought the same. Like, when I kind of started getting into the area a while ago, it's like, surely a regular heartbeat and a more like a metronome is better, and a better sign of health and fitness. But it's not, actually some variety in the way your heart beats is better for recovery and relaxation. Clearly, like, when you need to go and, things, whether it's sports performance or you're getting chased by a mammoth or a tiger, you want your heart to do the right thing, and that's clearly the way that the system's tuned in.
Yeah, and that then makes sense too, because, like, if you're not in this fight or flight response, yet your heart is just constantly working like a metronome, really rapid, very, potentially high, high numbers of beats, and certainly really short variability between each beat, yet you're just chilling out, resting, you might be 36, 48 hours post, after a game or something like that, or a big training block, and your heart's still humming along with this really low, this low variability. It's probably not necessarily a good thing if your system's still, ticking it along, when it really shouldn't be. It should be just in recovery mode. So it kind of is once again, like anything, this is a signal, like a blood pressure, like any heart rate, like O2 sats on any given moment, like a lot of different things. Like, any kind of measure needs to be taken into account with a trend over time, because of all the things that there's going to be, almost like the name suggests, there's a lot of variability here with your heart rate variability, and any day-to-day changes need to be taken with a grain of salt. What we need to be looking at very carefully is, where's the trend, and usually a 7-day cycle is a good trend. And then obviously fortnightly, monthly is probably a better way to sort of look at how are you internally. Because things like, poor sleep, you could have a crap night's sleep, you could have a really nice big weekend on the booze with, friends, and, poor sleep, lots of booze, lots of good takeaway food, all that kind of stuff. You might even be fighting a little illness in the background. All these things are going to be sort of driving your central nervous system, and more often than not, your sympathetic system as well. So all needs to be taken into context. For very, very kind of broad numbers speaking, as I said before, generally speaking, good are higher numbers, bad is lower numbers, but it does range greatly. 20 to 100 milliseconds is measured in milliseconds as well. So it's very brief moments in time. They're not like, seconds or 2 seconds between each beat. These are milliseconds. So, and it's the difference in time between each R wave on a, so we want to, the range is between 20 to 100. And for some context, the female data set that I'll talk about a little bit later, the typical readings in the morning for females usually sits between 64 and 70 milliseconds, but that can also change over time. I was interested, going through this myself, and I've been seeing a trend where mine usually sits about 55 milliseconds on a good morning and a good night's sleep. Really rough night's sleep, which I've saw a bit of a trend of that last month. I was probably seeing my numbers hover around about the 30 milliseconds. So a really big difference there over a continuous 2-week period where my numbers were much, much lower than what they'd normally sit in that kind of 50, 55 range for the best part of my weeks and months. So
How do you find that data? Because I think I've mentioned a couple of times on this podcast that, like I stopped wearing like my devices overnight because I just didn't want the burden of being assessed while I was resting. And
Yeah,
it's like the last thing I want to do is go to sleep and feel like I'm resting for the night, and then I get rated about it, like with everything else on life. So with you seeing your numbers kind of change, does that actually increase like your own anxiety about like how you're feeling about things? Does it actually does it consolidate and go, yeah, well, fair enough, the my data's telling me what I feel? How do you interpret it yourself?
More the latter for me. Like it's more of a like when I was sort of waking up tired, or just at the end of the week just feeling a bit just flat. I mean, there was like a couple of nights 2 weeks ago where I sort of came to Thursday night and I was in bed by 8 o'clock. Which is very unusual for me. Like I'm usually first up in the morning, last to bed every night. I was beating the kids to bed, a couple of, Thursday, Friday nights, and it sort of consolidated. And I already knew, I'd been sort of burning the candle at both ends with work and exercise, and sort of got to those couple of days in particular. And it was like, a few sort of signals were coming through my HRV those days, and all that week and the week before that were kind of in that kind of low 30s. And I was like, okay, well, I don't try to actively change it. And I can't really do anything about what's happened the night before or that sort of week before, but it kind of, for me, it kind of reinforces that's not panic stations. Like I'm not catastrophizing why I feel like crap, or, kind of goes hand in hand with me. It's like, okay, well, I know I've had a couple of rough weeks. I know that's something I need to change. I know my sleep's been pretty rubbish. My sleep hygiene's been pretty poor. I'm just been a bit haphazard and all over the place. I need to recorrect that. And lo and behold, 5 to 7 days later, get back into better habits, and I restore the system. But yeah, I don't wake up every morning like what I used to do with my sleep scores. I used to try to, it was a competition in the house to get the best sleep every night kind of thing. So with the HRV, it's just one of those things I just keep an eye on, but I don't necessarily try to change it actively. It's like I just know it's a byproduct of the stuff that's going on around me more than anything.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it was interesting though. When I got really sick at the start of last year with that bacterial infection, I went back through that data just recently to see was there any signals, because people do talk about the kind of signals around flus and viruses and illnesses, and there was sort of nothing there in that HRV data about that time when I was having 38, 39 degree fevers and all that kind of wild stuff going on. There was nothing that was picked up at that stage that really sort of, when I went back retrospectively and just had a look at it just recently. So it's probably some faulty data systems on my behalf. But anyway, ECG's the gold standard here. The Whoop rings and the Aura rings and all your smartphone and tech gadgets are good for a certain degree, but certainly not gold standard by any means. Just also too, just a little side note, HRV is generally higher in younger and fitter people, and it declines with age. And comparing your number to somebody else's is pretty meaningless. So certainly it's not a competition, unlike VO2 max scores or sleep numbers. So yeah, that's a little brief background to it.
Did you manage to look at any studies that looked at the accuracy of like the different devices? I mean, is there any difference between having an Oura ring or an Apple Watch or a Garmin, for instance?
Not particularly, no. I kind of just kept it at a bit more of an exercise level, but it'd be something to probably go and have a look at to see if I'm sure there has been studies done on it, but I didn't quite dive under that far into the hood.
Yeah, okay.
Bit of a background to it though, HRV being of cardiovascular in nature. It was first sort of picked up by cardiologists where they found that a low HRV after a heart attack predicted worse outcomes in those patients. And for cardiologists, it's a clinical risk marker, not a fitness gadget score. So for certain medical professionals, it's a real number they want to be having a look at. For us as everyday exercises and potential elite exercises, it's a number, and it's a signal worth acknowledging. But for some people, it can sometimes be a bit more of a life and death number, but probably not so much what we're talking about today. As a general rule also too, before we get into some of the research, that HRV recovery over time depending on exercise too. So this was some numbers found by Stanley and colleagues. The title of the paper was Cardiac Parasympathetic Reactivation Following Exercise, published in Sports Medicine 2013. After a light session of exercise, so we're talking, 50% to max, like a really sort of low, let's call it zone one training. HRV recovers in roughly 24 hours back to baseline. After our moderate threshold sessions, we're seeing recovery 24 to 48 hours post-recovery, and that's dependent on your levels of fitness. So the fitter the people, higher the VO2 max scores, the quicker your HRV will recover. And after hard, high-intensity sessions, expect to see HRV take at least 48 hours to recover back to baseline after that. So that kind of, probably fits in with what we generally know across a lot of different systems in the body, that high-intensity sessions are very stressful in lots of different ways, to musculoskeletal health, to bone health, to tendon health, to central nervous system, and obviously HRV here in particular. There's going to be a hangover from that work, and when you put your next high intensity session in, it's probably got to be carefully planned, and we've got to sort of be making sure that we're doing the right amount of training at the right time. There's going to be times where you probably can push the friendship and do some multiple high intensity sessions in close proximity to each other, because that's what you're driving towards, an outcome and a training goal. General preparation point of view, or a general health and fitness point of view, we certainly don't want to be stacking these these high intensity sessions too close together before our body's recovered, before we then try and do a second. So just something to sort of think about planning this type of high intensity work.
Yep.
So onto our first study, which looked at monitoring athletic training status through heart rate regulation, a systematic review and meta-analysis by Bellinger and colleagues, 2016. This was a study and published in Sports Medicine. This was a study that looked at 355 endurance-trained athletes across 24 studies. 20 of the 27 studies were male participants only. 6 studies were mixed sex, and one of the studies, the sex of the athletes weren't reported. Age of the athlete ranged from years to the early 40s, so a fairly youngish kind of cohort, and a mix of international, national, regional, and recreational athletes. So like a pretty trained group of athletes, mostly males. Basically, what we found here was that when we train at that level, we get fitness improvements, we get VO2 changes and all those kind of things. HRV subsequently will go up, and that's probably an expected finding. But there was a fairly good twist from this, was that when athletes were overreaching and training beyond their limits, so they're training hard, they're training fast, they're pushing the friendship, they're pushing the limits of what their body can handle, training too hard, their HRV got worse. And that kind of makes sense. If we get fitter, we get the balance right, our HRV is going to go up, and we're going to be in this kind of nice, fit, relax kind of state. We overreach, our HRV is going to come down. That's not a good thing. So this is where HRV as a number won't tell us everything we need to know, okay? Because we need to be looking at trends. They did recommend in this paper that we do look at, particularly in the elite world, we probably look at a trend of at least a week to 14 days of just assessing how things are going. And interestingly, just 13 days of intensified training dropped the resting heart rate variability by about a quarter to nearly a half, which kind of sort of goes to show how much kind of work needs to be put in for us to get either a positive change or a negative change. So I think that here we're sort of seeing a bit of a mixed bag of results here for our elite athletes. We know training in itself is going to be good. It's going to drive your VO2 max up. It's going to drive a lot of other kind of physical qualities to make you better. But there's a certain threshold before things can either keep going in a positive way, or it can take a really bad U-turn and things can go pear-shaped for you. So it's something to keep an eye on, and one of the numbers athletes will probably want to keep an eye on, and coaches, but something that I guess needs to be taken into context of the training year and the training calendar.
And I think also, we spoke about this at the top of the episode about how, general life and stresses in life can also have an influence on that. And I'm sure you'll nod your head when you say this, and as a physio, is that often like what we see when athletes come in injured, particularly with chronic, longer term injuries, is that there is often a training imbalance, but a lot of the time the athletes can kind of recognize that and kind of modify, but so often something else happens in their life also, whether it's like, there's a relationship that kind of goes sour, there's a death in the family, there's pressure on them because, like they're coming up for renewal with their contract or something along those lines. And those things will stress the cardiovascular system as well. And those things will lower your HRV. So you can see that, with this data, for instance, and I know that I've seen it with my own, is that when you get the intersection of like training hard and then also life stress on top, that can be sometimes the thing that tips you over the edge.
Yep, agree. Seen it many, many times before. And it's going to be affected by, we know like certain things will affect, like what we ingest. So we think of caffeine, we think of nicotine, we think of any other kind of stimulants. They're going to have a really profound knock-on effect to your sympathetic system and how your body reacts and plays out as well. So if we're training hard, then we're sort of, making poor lifestyle choices in terms of, alcohol, drugs, all these kind of things. It's going to, sustain some of those, the knock-on effect to the sympathetic system and affect HRV too. So there's going to be a really broad contextual reason as to why people's scores are going up and down. But that lifestyle-related stuff too is something that I don't think we probably put enough credit to that. And I think that's something for me as a clinician I'm starting to probably appreciate more as, when someone's presenting with an injury or they're getting signs of fatigue, where I'm starting to ask a deeper question now. It's like, how's things at home? How's things at work? What's sort of going on in the background? Like how, it sounds like you're training a lot. How can we sort of find and factor ways into recovery, or what other strategies can we do to sort of lower, that sympathetic drive? So yeah, I think that sort of comes with time and a bit of experience as a clinician. Well, moving on to the next one, which is just looking at heart rate variability in healthy adults in general. This is a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials led by Amma Amekran, sorry if I got that name wrong, and colleagues, 2024, published in Curious 2024. We've got 623 healthy adults here, 16 randomized controlled trials included, a nice big mix of males and females, 19 years of age through to 68. Importantly, we're looking at healthy adults here, not elite athletes, and effectively looking at ordinary people who take up structured exercise. So it's probably a clinically relevant one here for all of us. The key takeaways from this paper was that, surprise, surprise, regular exercise genuinely improved HRV in ordinary healthy adults. So this is very, it's good to see. The largest effects were actually seen in some of the clinical studies done, particularly those that have got type 2 diabetes or heart disease. So people with comorbidities and some lifestyle related diseases, there's some really genuine improvements that can be done there to improve their cardiovascular health. Adults aged over the age of 40 showed equal or greater benefit in their exercise programming than younger adults, which kind of gives us a nice, positive message here. It's not too late to start. I think a lot of people are probably feeling like, it's maybe too late to start exercise or too late to make a change. But as we saw, and as you talked about last episode about VO2 max, people are coming off a really low base and are going from low physical activity levels to even get up to moderate levels of physical activity, how positive it can be to reduce or risk cause mortality. So, so it's probably not a surprising paper, but I think once again, it probably reinforces how things can change in a really positive way when we start exercising. Like it's, whether or not it's as a powerful number as what VO2 max will be, obviously this is a byproduct of exercise. So as your HRV goes up, as your fitness levels go up, so will your HRV. We want that to be sort of, getting higher. We don't want those low numbers. So it often goes hand in hand. So, but it's a good sign of good internal rest, recovery, recuperation, and a sign that your body's in this calm, relaxed state. And that's ultimately what we want to keep on driving. Onto the female population. So this is a living systematic review currently go as we speak. So this was the first part of it was published this year in 2026. led by Diaga and colleagues. Now, this paper is titled Wearable Derived Heart Rate Variability Across the Menstrual Cycle, Hormonal Contraceptive Use and Reproductive Life Stages in Females, a Systematic Review. So this is a living review, and it's being continuously updated as new reach comes in to hand, and it's already been updated twice since its initial publication. Now, this is a massive cohort. We've got 19,322 females across 16 different studies, and we're looking at different ages. So we've got our reproductive age, 18 to 40. We've got our perimenopause and midlife group of 42 to 56 on average, and we've got postmenopausal, which is roughly 45 plus females, and a mix of athletes, female athletes, and general population include as well. So a massive nearly 20,000 female participant study here. Key takeaways from this one. HRV genuinely shifts across the monthly cycle. So it's usually higher early on, but lower in the second half of the cycle. And the time differences can roughly change by about 3 to 9% between the early and late stages of the cycle, which is a pretty big swing.
Yeah.
Because if we think about, and this is probably what I haven't sort of spoken about yet, but it did come up in one of the initial papers, was that we talk about HRV being a signal and something to keep tabs of. The kind of true kind of, not concern, but it's one of these things. If there's a 3% shift over a course of a week or a month, they're the kind of things that you start to try to maybe dive a bit deeper into training regimes, training statuses, what your recovery's like, what your sleep's like, what your nutrition's like. When you're seeing a 3% swing over the course of a week or a month, that's when you may want to act. So the 3 to 9% swing over the course of the female cycle is something of relevance here. But this is very female dependent, and it's going to be largely driven by the hormonal changes over the course of the month.
And was that a standard across all the women who were like pre-menopause, I take it? And also,
yes.
Did that also account for people who were on the contraceptive pill? Was there a difference between people who were or were not on the contraception?
Yeah, so women on combined hormonal contraceptives typically showed lower HRV than naturally cycling women, possibly linked to the absence of the natural progesterone peak, is what the authors are talking about here. Progesterone-only contraception produced patterns more similar to a natural cycle of HRV. HRV will decline through menopause, but it's also tangled in with the fact that HRV also drops in with age in everyone as well. So it can't be purely attributed to hormones in the perimenopause and the menopausal group. So an interesting study there, and glad to see like a big body of work here being done with the female population, a massive 20,000 population cohort that's constantly evolving as more studies are brought to hand. But yeah, interesting effects of the monthly cycle on HRV, swings of 3 to 9% over the course of the cycle, and definitely links to the contraceptive pill.
It just needs to be known, doesn't it, for the female athletes? Because if they're looking at that data if they're looking at their own data and this study was not done or not known, it's like I get all these wild swings with my HRV. Like, what's going on? I don't understand. Like, my training's fairly routine and I haven't changed a lot. So this is good insight.
Yeah, it's good to sort of know that there's going to be normal ranges there that just happily exist within us all, particularly with the females. So that's hopefully some enlightening there. Last one's on our adolescent population. So we've got a group of this was a study led by Kamandoulis and colleagues in 2020, and this was daily resting heart rate variability in adolescent swimmers during an 11-week training program. Now, this was an observational study. There was no control group at this point in time. It's the best available evidence for this age group, as there's not much in this space outside of the adult populations. So this was 22 national level adolescent swimmers, all competitive, 7 male, 15 female, average age of about 14 and a half. Now, they had basically daily HRV monitoring over an 11-week training cycle. Now, this was where it got, probably the messages that probably we're already sort of starting to sing here, is that there's so much day-to-day variability with heart rates, particularly in this group here. And looking at day-to-day HRV was not a reliable signal to guide what happens next in their training week. So not to be used as I guess a training tool, more so HRV in this instance was more to be used, because there are some studies out there which I didn't talk about too much because there's probably another topic basically could be discussed about this, but there were some trials done where the training was manipulated over a period of time based on what was happening with the athlete's HRV versus a normal periodized training program. I didn't go too deeply into that, but there was some slight benefits in those groups that in the elite world and usually done in soccer. Soccer seems to be a very popular sport where HRV is looked at, and there were some studies that looked at HRV adjusted training versus a normal periodized type of training, and there was slight advantages if you adjusted your training based on HRV, which kind of makes sense. Like if you're seeing your athletes are cooked and their HRV is low, then it sort of makes sense you start adjusting the training cycle. But also too, we know not to jump at shadows as well. And that's what this paper here was sort of showing. The day-to-day variability was off the charts. Was surprising though that HRV in this group of elite swimmers didn't kind of show up negatively or positively in that setting with sleep. So with these athletes with their 24-hour monitoring, a heavy, intense training session, when they looked at the HRV data the day after, it didn't sort of throw their HRV scores out and lower them, which you'd expect after a high-intensity training session. You'd expect in that 24-hour window in this young group that their HRV would fall through the floor in response to their training, but it didn't necessarily shift it across the board. So there was some surprising numbers there. And what they did find, probably the more consistent figure in finding here, was that the sustained training load over the course of the duration of the program did leave a mark, as opposed to just these really noisy signals that were going all over the place. So the sustained training load of 3 to 5 consecutive days of high volume, so more than 6 kilometers a day in the pool, produced a consistent 4.5% drop in HRV, recovering after a couple of easy days. So yeah, for up to 5 days, a consistent high volume, big drop in HRV by up to 4.5%. But as we said, it bounces back within a couple of days. And there was a clear pattern over the course of a week as well. So HRV peaked Sunday and Monday. So after a couple of light days at the back end of the week for these kids, their HRV bounced back up, got back up high again, and bottomed out by Friday. And that was a pretty consistent trend that they saw over the 11-week cycle. So an interesting one to round up at the HRV chat, mate. Did you make anything of that last one on the swimmers?
I always like the swimming data, so I think it's interesting. But I think that the key takeaway from me for everything you've put together, which has been excellent, by the way, is that just don't assess one day. It's all got to do with kind of what happens with the HRV when it's stacked, training sessions over time. And, you got to look at medium to longer term trends as opposed to what's happening day to day. Because as you said, if you just kind of looking at one day here and there, you're jumping at shadows. And sometimes, like we've spoken about so many times on the podcast, some level of stress is a good thing in athletic performance, and that's part of adaptation, is that if for swimmers, for instance, if you're going to do a heavy 3 weeks of training and you know that you've got a heavy 3 weeks of training and then you taper down and then you kind of come back up a little bit for your competition, you usually come primed and ready in a good situation. Yeah. So some level of stress is good as long as it's periodized and programmed, and you know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly right. I love that message. It's just, if you know what's coming, if you know what's coming, you sort of prepare, almost like pre-prepare it. Like, that you got to have a couple of, probably lower, moderate sort of training intensity, so you're not going into it cooked, but then also too, you plan for it afterwards as well. So I think there's definitely some art versus science there when it comes to that. So just probably to wrap up and just to sort of reinforce some of the key points here, that, HRV ultimately reflects your nervous system, and it's your, it really relies on your kind of relaxation, sympathetic versus parasympathetic system. And we want basically your braking system or your parasympathetic system to really try and take charge here. We don't want our sympathetic system, a flight or flight response, constantly humming along in the background, making our heart rate variability too low. But as we said, it's very variable. And just remember, it's not a direct measure of muscle fatigue or other things. It also depends on sleep quality, mental stress, lots of different things, diet, so on and so forth. So it's just a piece of the puzzle. A 3% shift in your own baseline from a week or a monthly basis, depending on which number you're looking at, is an acceptable threshold for this is a probably real situation here we need to have a look at and look at how we can adjust your training or recovery or whatever it needs to be. Generally, high HRV scores are better, but it can be for some people too much of a simplistic rule. So just obviously take everything with a grain of salt, but lower HRV is certainly a consistent finding where lower is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to HRV. And yeah, there's still a lot of unknowns, and particularly the female population. We've got some really nice live living data being currently collected. We know quite a lot about our endurance athletes and healthy populations and elite males. Adolescents and females, we're still getting to know that space a lot more. So just watch this space as time goes on. So that was good. I enjoyed that. I learned a lot, and I'm going to probably keep a little running tab of my HRV, but probably not as much as my VO2 max score. I'll update everyone next time about how things are going there.
I'll remember to ask. Good episode, mate. Well done.
Very good. All right, well, that's a wrap for this episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer, as always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical or individual advice. Please always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. A big thanks to our sponsors, Premax, High Performance Skincare for High Performance People, and Learn.physio. World-class education for health professionals. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.